Good afternoon. My name is Zach Gibson, and I'm in the Governor's Office of Adoption and Child Protection. I, along with my colleague, Ms. Janelle King with the Department of Children and Families, will be supporting today's webinar with our hosts and moderators, whom you will meet here shortly. On behalf of Prevent Child Abuse Florida and the Department of Children and Families, welcome to today's webinar on Bringing Protective Factors to Life, Social Connections. We thank you for taking the time to join us, and we look forward to your participation. Please be advised we are recording this webinar and will make it, along with the presentation slides, available on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website at www.preventchildabusefl.org. Our host to provide today's welcome, here's Mr. Chris Lally.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you tuning in to our webinar series, The Protective Factors, Bringing the Protective Factors to Life. Today, we are going to talk about the social connections and the importance of social connections. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our illustrious presenters in just a second. But before I do that, I just want to take the time to again say thank you to everyone. We know that normally this time of year, we're out there visiting all the communities around the state, helping you say thank you and support the children and families in your community. This year, sadly, we're not able to do that. So we wanted to be able to bring something to the table that would inform and educate everyone to the best of our ability. And we thought that having these webinars on the protective factors, which when present in families help to reduce, ameliorate, or even eliminate the risk that children face in their communities. And we wanted to be able to provide these to you all. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'd like to go ahead now and introduce our speakers and panelists for today. They are fabulous. Just make sure that you know that a recording of this webinar and associated materials will be available at preventchildabusefl.org. And if you have any questions, you can email me. That's Chris Lally, clally@ounce.org. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters and take it away. Sarah.
Thank you, Chris, for your leadership and that of the Department of Children and Families and the Governor's Office. My name is Sarah Shepard. I'm a certified recovery peer specialist and the statewide recovery integration specialist with the Department of Children and Families and the Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. We will offer several participation opportunities to include using the question box today. And as my colleague Maria and I share more about ourselves, we would like to know who is on today's webinar. So a little bit about myself is I'm a mother of 4 wonderful children. I'm a woman with great faith who has 10 years of long-term recovery with substance use disorder and mental health struggles. In 2010, I delivered a baby who was born substance exposed. At that time, all of my children were removed and placed with family members. I have received services from Florida's behavioral health system, and now, thanks to God and recovery, I have had the opportunity to become a part of the healing of our system. I was introduced to the protective factors in the 4th year of my recovery after having suffered several traumatic events while clean. I found out about the community cafes offered through Healthy Start in Volusia Flagler and eventually began to work for them as a parent leader working with parents whose children had been removed. The organizational framework of Healthy Start is based upon the protective factors framework, focusing on what is strong with families and not what is wrong. I was able to see how they could help break cycles, not only within the lives of the families we were serving, but with my own family and children as well. My children had experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences as a result of my own adverse behaviors and coping skills. And knowing that protective factors are teachable helps me to feel comfort in knowing that by implementing them in our daily lives, I am supporting my children by reducing their risks and supporting them while they are on their own wellness journey. I truly believe in the power of protective factors. I would now like to turn it over to my colleague, Miss Maria Long.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your powerful story of the social connections and the impact that they've had on your life. And thanks to each of you for joining us today. I am the mother of two amazing grown children, Nicole, 41, and John, 31, and two grandsons, Juan II, 12, and Jameson, 2. I was blessed to have been trained in the protective factors in 2013, and since then have been teaching them to organizations, community groups, families, caregivers, and churches. The protective factors have changed the way that I parent my grown children, and certainly the way that I interface with my grandsons, all in a positive way. While all of the protective factors have helped me to be a better parent, a better person, the social connections protective factor is the one that has most impacted my life as a child, an adolescent, a young adult, a parent, and now as a grandparent. So now that Sarah and I have introduced ourselves, we'd like to know who's joining us. Janelle, could you please assist us with this?
Sure. Thanks, Maria. And thanks for everyone who's on today's webinar. So if you can go ahead and check out the questions tab on the right side of your screen, there's a questions box, and we'd love to hear from you all. If you can share what county you're from, no need to share your name because it automatically comes up. So just share what county you're from, name of your agency, if you're from an agency or if you're a community member or parent. So I have a lot of people typing in right now, and I'll share out some. Nancy's from Ohio, guardian ad litem. Let's see. Jennifer Rounds is a new parent support home visitor from Jacksonville. We have Charlotte County, Polk County, Alachua, Brevard. I think it's easier just to name out counties since they're pouring in right now. Sumter County, Brevard, Eckerd's Connect, Leon County, Florida Department of Corrections. We have St. Lucie County, ELC. We have lots of people from Guardian ad litem. Lake County, DCF, Child Protective Investigator. We have more Guardian ad litem. We have people from Broward, Family Central. We have some folks from, let's see, Drug Coalition, Community Alliance, Lake County, St. John's, Guardian ad litem, Healthy Families, Florida. Lots and lots of people are typing in right now. So seems like we have people from all over the place. So I think I'll go ahead and hand it on back to you. Thank you all for being on.
Janelle, thank you, and thank you once again to everybody who has decided to join us. So since we're going to be hosting our Strengthening Families Protective webinar virtually and not in person, I just want to go over a couple of conversation norms. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the first conversation of norms talks about the opportunity for us to speak from your own experience. It says, speak your truth. So really what we want you, when you put things in the chat and in our question box today, we really want you to use I statements. It's really important that we understand what your perspective is. We talk about speaking and owning your own truth and trusting that your voice will be heard and your contribution will be respected, and it absolutely will. We ask that you would please listen attentively and deeply. This means really not only physically hearing what's going on, but really seeking to understand what it is that we're trying to share with you and the things that other people will be sharing with you on our chat and our question. We want to listen to what's being said, listen to the feelings beneath the words. And we're hoping that you will strive to achieve a balance between listening, reflecting, speaking, and acting. The next one talks about suspending judgments. You know, judgments can really get in our way of sometimes listening and hearing things and really even understanding what's being said. So we're asking that you would please set aside your judgments as we go through our webinar. And this really allows you to create a space between our judgments and our reactions. And it allows us to be able to listen more deeply to one another, to ourselves, and to each other. And last, but certainly not least, we ask that this will be a place of confidentiality. And when I talk about that, we talk about the fact that the stories can stay, but the lessons may leave. We want this to be a safe place, so that we would just ask people really to be very open and honest with the things that you would want to share, understanding that this is a safe place. Next slide, please. The change is now. There's so many quotes that I thought about when we put this presentation together, but probably just in light of what's the amount of change that we're all experiencing right now, I thought this one was so appropriate. So let's read this together. It says, the change is now. The truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. And it says here the author of this is M. Scott Peck. He is in fact a doctor. He wrote this quote, and it is a part of a book called The Road Less Traveled, which lots of folks have read. It came out in the 70s, and the whole idea behind what he was really talking about was the idea that we need to draw from our internal strengths in order to face change. So what are the things that we know about change? We know that change is inevitable. And the important thing about change is how we see it, how we respond to it. That's what makes the difference. Change is always going to be here. But once again, how is it that you respond and cope with that change? That is what will make a difference. We all know that change can be challenging and difficult. However, we also know that change can allow us an opportunity to see and to do things differently. Change provides opportunity for growth and exploration, for formulating new goals and plans, and really for gaining a better understanding of who we are, and even more importantly than that, sometimes what is our purpose in life. And this can bring about better solutions and outcomes for ourselves, our families, and our communities. So at this point, before we actually start talking about our protective factors, we're going to do a quick poll to find out your knowledge about the protective factors framework. So we're asking all of you if you would please respond to this question. And the question is, are you familiar with the protective factors framework? Please select yes if you are and no if you're not. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes just so we can get an idea of how many people are acquainted with this framework. So while we're doing that, I'm just going to share a little bit more information with you about the framework. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework as the tools that will aid us along this journey that I call our parenting journey. This can help us to be the best parents that we can be each and every day, and especially during this time of uncertainty. The protective factors is strength-based and seeks to help families identify their current strengths as well as areas in their parenting which present challenges and opportunities. And I see that we have some results from the polls before I continue. It looks like at least 48% of you are familiar with the framework. That is absolutely fantastic. And it looks like about 52% are not. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you will be more familiar with the framework and specifically with the protective factor called social connections. Thank you all for sharing. So once again, we're going to talk about these tools to navigate the journey. Talked a little bit already about this protective factor framework and what it is. It is strength-based. It seeks to help families identify their current parental strengths, as well as areas in their parenting which present challenges and opportunities for improvement. So one of the things I love that Sarah said, she talked about it's looking at what is strong, not what is wrong. I love that statement. It gives us information on the protective factors because we know that they are an important part of helping to reduce risk and the ever-present danger of child abuse and neglect, not only in our homes, but in our communities, in our cities, in our states, and really across this nation. So let's learn a little bit more about these protective factors. So here are the 5 protective factors that really have been kind of translated into everyday language. I'm going to quickly go through them and then provide you some more information about them. So the first one talks about parental resilience. And for those of you who missed our first webinar last week, we talked about parental resilience, and it really talks about our ability to be strong and flexible, what it is that we need in order to be able to overcome adversities and all the stressors that are going to be in our lives as we go throughout this journey called life. Social connections is what we're going to talk about today, and it really says that parents need friends, but we're going to expand that to even go to parents need really positive social connections. We talk about the protective factor that's called concrete support in times of need, which is what we'll be talking about next week, which really talks to the idea that all of us need help at some times, and what does that help look like and feel like. We talk about knowledge of parenting and child development. In this case, we talk about being a parent is part natural and part learned. And then the other part of that really talks about that we need to make sure we understand the developmental cycle of our children so that we have appropriate expectations of them and we understand our behaviors and how it is we role model for them what it is they need to know at any point in their life. And the last one talks about social and emotional competence of children. It says that parents need to help their children communicate. That is like one of the most important protective factors also, because it's really the one that focuses on children. The first 4, parental resilience, social connections, concrete support in times of need, knowledge of parenting and child development, those are all protective factors that specifically are aimed at in terms of strengthening the skills of the parents. However, this last one really focuses on children. And if you look at the bottom, you see one that says nurturing and attachment are included within each factor. So this framework has since been updated to identify the importance, once again, of that social and emotional competence of children, with nurturing and attachment included in all of the protective factors. Prevent Child Abuse Florida embraces all of these protective factors, and they recognize the nurturing and attachment as a 6th standalone protective factor because of its importance in the relationship between the parent and the child. So what do we know about these protective factors? We know that these protective factors have been in existence since the early 2000s. They came about by an organization called the Center for the Study of Social Policy. We know that when these protective factors are present in our homes, that we will have safer homes, stronger homes, healthier homes. We know that when these protective factors are strong in families, that our children are safer. That once again, what are our families? Healthier, happier, and better prepared to manage stress and the change that's going to come in their lives. So many of you may have already been practicing some of these protective factors without even knowing or calling it by these names. It's probably something that you just did because it made sense and it helped you to achieve some specific goal you had in mind. So what do we want to do? Today, we want to make sure that we understand the power of these protective factors, how they can help us to be great parents, not just good parents. We want to be great parents. And once again, how it is that can help us to have healthy, safe, and trusting relationships with our children, because that is really the goal. We have to be that safe place for our children. So what are the protective factors? It talks about attributes or conditions of individuals, families, communities, or even the larger society that reduce and eliminate risk and promote healthy development and well-being of children and families. So once again, that's a two-parter. What do? They help reduce and eliminate risk, and then they also promote healthy development and well-being of children and families. So what does this say? Protective factors can do what? They can help ensure that children and youth function well in all these different environments, whether it's at home, at school, at work, in your community, at church, from adolescence, from childhood, adolescence, all the way into adulthood. What do? They serve as buffers, helping parents who might otherwise be at risk for abusing and neglecting their children to find that inner strength that they need, to find those resources, those supports, and other healthy coping mechanisms that would allow them to parent effectively, even under stress. And stressors could be situations like not being able to pay our bills, we might lose our job, the lack of food, shelter, and clothing or transportation for our families. We might be dealing with a current or past addiction, dealing with physical and or mental issues, or just being a part of an unhealthy relationship. What can protective factors do? They can help you identify healthy and constructive ways to deal with these stressors and others in a way that will help you become a great parent, caregiver, and person. So what do we know? We know that families thrive when the protective factors are robust in their lives and in their communities. And you will too, if you will commit to learning about and bringing these protective factors to life. So how do we build these protective factors? There's lots of things we can do, but I'm just going to talk about 3 bullets that I think that are really important. The first one talks about taking care of yourself, or what we call self-care. First and foremost, we have got to be able to take care of ourselves. And when I talk about being healthy, and I'm not talking about just being physically healthy, we must be physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, as well as spiritually healthy. If in fact we are to not only take care, if we are to help to take care of others. You cannot take care of others if you are not well yourself. And if you look at the graphic that's up at the right-hand corner of the screen when it talks about self-care, I love this graphic because it's just such a great pictorial of some of the things we can do when we talk about self-care. It talks about things such as being part of a healthy community. It talks about priorities that you need to be able to set those and to really understand that you cannot do all things all the time. We talk about choices. Hopefully we're able to make good choices, the best choices for ourselves and our family. We talk about the idea of kindness. How do we experience pleasure? We need to just slow down sometimes. We're going 100 miles a minute, and sometimes we're not even, what do they say, be able to smell the roses. We talk about the possibilities of curiosity and exploration. So these are just some of the things when you think about self-care. We talk about commit to being a stronger parent or a strong parent. That's one of the most important things I think that we can do, is a commitment to say that on any given day, I want to be a better parent than I even was yesterday. I want to learn new skills. I want to learn new knowledge. I want to be able to role model even different and better behavior than I was yesterday. But just like everything else in life, if it's something you want to do, you have to practice it. You have to commit to it. So I'm asking everybody on this phone if you're willing to commit to being a strong parent. And last but not least, we talk about building a healthy relationship with each of your children. So one of the things I tell people when I teach this class, I said one of the best gifts that you can give to your children is to know your children. Each one of your children is a unique individual. Just like we as adults are unique, so are your children. And you need to know what each of your children needs from you. It's not going to be the same. You don't love your children all the same. You don't treat your children all the same, because they are different. They have different needs. So we have to know what those needs are and how it is that we need to respond to those needs to make sure that we're being the parent that that child needs to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel nurtured. So building protective factors. What do we need to do? We need to be able to identify our parental strengths and weaknesses and develop a plan to enhance the strengths that would also enable us to address what those weaknesses are. Building protective factors will enable you to build a healthy relationship with each of your children because you will be able to understand and address their unique needs. So today we're going to be focusing on, and we're just going to provide you a very, very high level introduction to the social connections protective factor. Once again, translated, it talks about parents need friends. But when I talk about it, once again, I'm going to expand it to parents need positive social connections. So before we go any further, I'm going to share my stories about the powers of social connections in my life. And this is just one small piece of my life in terms of the power of social connections. I call it my story, power and promises of social connections. I was born and raised in a poor African-American family in Detroit, Michigan during the 1960s. I remember even as a child, it seems that my parents were always struggling to make ends meet. Even though we never lived in the projects, we lived in mostly low-income housing until my parents were able to purchase our home when I was in the 8th grade. Both of my parents were from Tennessee, where they were born and raised, and they actually met in Detroit, where they were married and had myself and 3 other siblings. They both had moved north, just like so many other Black people, looking for a better way of life for themselves. They did not have a lot of support from others on any level, emotional, social, financial, or otherwise. In many ways, they were on their own to try to figure out this thing called family. They both had high school educations. My mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom who worked part-time doing day work for a family that lived in a suburb just outside of Detroit. My mom was a gentle, loving, caring, soft-spoken person. On the other hand, my dad was a broken man and a functioning alcoholic. He worked on the assembly line for Chrysler Corporation, which meant good money some of the time and not so much a whole lot of the other times. This was compounded by the fact that because my father was an alcoholic, he wasted a lot of money that we had as a family on alcohol and all that comes with that. I remember it seemed like we were always lacking something that we needed, not wanted, but we needed. My father was not physically abusive to my mother or us, but was verbally and emotionally abusive to my mom when he would be drunk. It always scared me because I didn't understand what was happening and what the drunken stupor might lead to. I felt that my house was not safe, emotionally, physically, or mentally for me. I hated for the weekends to come because I knew my father would be drunk the entire weekend. And I was never sure what that would look like or feel like for myself, my mom, or my siblings. At the age of 3, I alone went to live with my aunt back in Tennessee when my mom became pregnant with my youngest sibling. At that time, my mom had 3 kids already. Myself, I was 3, my brother was 4, my eldest sister was 5. So my aunt, who was a school teacher, unmarried with no children, offered to come and get one of us to help my mom out. I was the chosen one. I lived a charmed life with her from the ages of 3 to 5. She had a home, a car, beautiful things, and provided everything that I could have asked for or wanted at that age. But at the age of 5, my parents decided they wanted me to come back to Detroit and start kindergarten. I remember as clear as day my first day of kindergarten. I loved everything about it, but especially my teacher, who was one of the first most beautiful Black, loving, caring women that I had ever encountered in my life. This became my norm in this school, which I went through from kindergarten through 6th grade, where most of the teachers were Black female teachers who loved and cared for you as if you belonged to them. They helped me see what the value of education was early on in my life, and the value of providing loving, caring, safe relationships to children who wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to experience it in any other way. God continued to bless me with these kinds of teachers, experiences, and social connections all throughout my elementary, middle, and even high school years. These Black educators taught me daily lessons that my parents were unable, not because they didn't want to, but because you cannot teach what you do not know. These educators were my greatest encouragers and advocates. These individuals helped me to navigate my childhood, adolescence, and my beginning of adulthood in ways that my parents simply were unable. Now, make no mistake about it, I was not the only chosen child they saw. They helped each child they saw that needed these things. They made sure that we were fed when we came to school hungry. They made sure we had proper clothing needed to come to school, especially during the winter months, such as jackets, coats, gloves, hats, things that we wouldn't necessarily have had. They made sure we understood and believed that we were smart and intelligent, and that we could become anything that we imagined if we studied and worked hard enough. They gave us opportunities to display our many gifts and talents in and outside of school. They were there to listen to us when we needed answers to questions that we were afraid to ask our parents, things about our feelings, things about our bodies. They were there to stop the bullying when and if it took place. They would always say, "Not on my watch." They were there to hug and to love on us when given the opportunity so that we would know what that looked like and felt like in a non-threatening situation. They were our mentors, our coaches, our extended families, and for many of us became surrogate mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, and even grandparents. They helped me transition from elementary to junior high school. They helped me to go to a prestigious high school in Detroit, Cass Technical High School, because they saw promise and potential in me. During high school, they helped me to get a work-study job, which had allowed me to have my own money for the first time in life. This work-study job turned into my first full-time job after high school and prepared me for working in corporate America. During high school, they also helped me understand and worked with me during my college application process. So because of these and other positive relationships and social connections early on in my life, I recognized the value of an education. I received an undergrad degree, a master's degree, and entered a doctoral program. I have a thirst for learning that is never satisfied, but most importantly, every day I try to be that loving, caring, nurturing person for not only my children and grandchildren, but for any others that I see might need it. I thank God for the many connections, the social connections that He has given me throughout my life. So believe and know with every fiber of your being that we have the power to change the lives of others. So I challenge each of you this day to ask yourself the question, whose life are you meant to change for the better? And when you find the answer to that, start doing that right now. So when we talk about social connections, it talks about the fact we are designed to be in relationship with one another, both physically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually. We are interconnected, we are interrelated, and we are reliant upon one another on this journey called life. We cannot live in isolation and be healthy, caring, loving, nurturing, and safe people or parents. So once again, out of all these protective factors, this is the one by far is the most important, because if you get this one right, the people that you have these connections with, they will help you get all those other protective factors right. This is crucial because as parents, we want to continue to learn about how to be healthy, nurturing, and loving relationships with our children, what it looks like, what it feels like. We are our child's first and most important teacher in life. We've got to be able to model that behavior. So over and over again, what does research tells us? That if a child has one, if they have more than one, that's absolutely fantastic. But research says if they just have one loving, caring, nurturing, and safe relationship, that it is the greatest mitigator to child adversities and risk. And keep in mind, one more time, you cannot teach what you do not know. These relationships can be family, friends, work colleagues, support groups, community groups, church groups, and whoever else you think will make a positive connection with. So when we talk about social connections, what is it that we really mean? The definition talks about what? Positive relationships that provide emotional, informational, instrumental, and spiritual support. We talk about social connections. We talk about having healthy, sustained relationships with the people. It could be institutions, the community, or just a larger force than yourself. Because we know for a fact that parents with high quality and constructive and supportive social relationships, they're better able to build the buffers that they need from the stressors and they will encounter, and they'll also be able to better support their nurturing behaviors and relationships to form secure attachments with their children. So for building these protective factors and keeping our families safe and strong, it's not just about having friends, but it talks about the quality of the friends that we have. We want to have social networks that include positive norms about parenting. What does it look like? What does it feel like? We talk about connections that can help families to gain their much needed to access resources that they may need. Social connections. So just some examples, I talked about those 4 different areas in terms of emotional, instrumental, informational, and spiritual. So when we talk about emotional support, it can be somebody affirming our parenting skills, or it could be just somebody that we just might want to talk to get things off of our chest. We talk about instrumental support, it could be you could be providing transportation, or it could be something along some of the financial assistance you might be able to provide. When we talk about informational, we're talking about providing people information in terms of how to be a better parent, how to role model that behavior. What are some other things that they might need to know in terms of being the best parent that they can be? In spiritual, it really talks about how is it that we model providing hope and encouragement. And this certainly does not mean that you're going to receive all of these for one person, because you're probably not. But it does mean that if you have multiple healthy social connections, that you will probably be able to get all of these needs met. We have some more examples in terms of these social connections. So we talk about what else does it mean? We talk about having friends, families, neighbors, and others who can help us solve problems, help buffer parents from stressors, help reduce our feelings of isolation, help promote meaningful interaction in a context of mutual trust and respect. And it really talks about, once again, having a sense of connectiveness that enables parents to feel secure, confident, and empowered to give back. Because when you feel that you are a good parent, you are comfortable sharing that with people, you're comfortable with having to know that people are going to look at you as a role model. So it's really important. Once again, these are just some examples of our social connections. So at this point, now that we've talked a little bit about social connections, we want to hear from you about social connections, and I'm going to turn it over to Janelle.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you for sharing your powerful story and part of your history of your life. We would like to hear from you all now. If you can use your questions box again on the right side of your screen and just share with us, who are the social connections that assist you with being a good parent, and how do they do that? And I'll read a few as they come in. We do have over 400 people on the webinar, so I'll just read out a few. Someone says the mother, they encourage and motivate them. Someone says it's hard for introverts. My team at work, my mother-in-law, teachers and their willingness to keep in communication. We also have priests, the faith network, coaches, child welfare peers. My grandmother was my mentor. Having good parents and friends. My sister-in-law, my fellow grandparents, friends, my 8 brothers and sisters who helped me grow my children. Most definitely my mother. She was always the best mother. Church first lady, husband, affirmations, other mothers and spiritual support group, aunts and great aunts, that they're faithful to tell the truth and encourage the person who wrote that. My child's Child Development Center director was instrumental to supporting them for many years. I have a small Connect group that she's very connected to. We share laughs, problems, and needs, also family, guardian ad litem staff. I saw lots of GAL staff on this webinar. There's lots of responses coming in. Older siblings, children's parents who then ended up becoming a really good group of friends, my fiance, lots of different supports. So thank you all for sharing those great responses. LGBTQ allies and supporters, thank you for that. And I'll go ahead and hand that back over to Sarah now to talk about why social connections are important.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Maria, for sharing your story with us. I'm going to go ahead and talk about why are social connections important. So social connections are important regardless of age or life stage. We always need positive social connections if we are to live healthy, nurturing, caring, and safe lives. Social connections are essential to strengthening families, whether it is family members, neighbors, friends, or coworkers. It is vital that parents have people in their lives that can provide social support. Parents need friends and people that care about them just as children do. Having these encouraging friendships and connections not only will help to protect against the stresses and frustrations that can lead to harsh parenting, but also they will promote happy and healthy relationships with children. And so a little bit about why the social connections are important to me and how they're important to my family within my own life. When I was growing up, I had a parent who was emotionally unavailable. We had food and water and a place to sleep, but there was a lack of connection or knowledge of how to deal with emotions in a healthy way. I found myself running to every friend's home who would allow me to stay for as long as they would allow me to stay. Their way of life became my way of life, and I learned to adapt like a chameleon. When I got clean in 2010, I had very little of my own sense of self. I knew what I had copied from some of those families, and today I know that some of those copied behaviors were my only guidance of healthy behaviors. When I got clean, I had 4 kids at all different ages, and they were 5 and under. It was extremely scary. I had 2 court systems over my head, both dependency and criminal, as a result of my using behaviors. Most of the time, I had to pretend that I wasn't having any struggles for fear that if I was honest, the system would assume that I did not love my children and they would take them away from me. If we know anything about trauma, it's that we can't work on what we don't bring to the light. If we can't work on our struggles, then it's almost inevitable that after I have checked all of my boxes on a court-ordered plan, that a relapse could occur. So I'm extremely grateful for the fellow parents I met within my 12-step group. They helped to guide me, and they were a safe place to talk about my fears and struggles without fear of facing judgment or repercussions. They weren't clinicians, though some of them eventually were. They guided me with their experience and strength and hope, and I was able to find some true, honest healing. Those 12-step relationships came and went, but the teacher for the lessons I needed to learn in my life appeared as I needed them. I learned to build positive relationships, and these relationships have helped me to break generational cycles with emotional neglect and physical abuse. Those relationships taught me new ways to parent and new ways to cope. I have experienced many traumas while in recovery. In my 4th year of recovery, my daughter fell out of a bunk bed and had to have emergency brain surgery. I went through a sexual assault with someone in my recovery program, and on Christmas of 2014, my younger children's father died in a motorcycle accident. The positive social connections that I had in my life at that time held me up until I could stand on my own 2 feet again. Because they were there, I did not have to use. I was suicidal for a few months, but because they were there, I didn't have to die. I didn't have to throw away any of the things that I had worked so hard for over those first 4 years of recovery. With friends by my side, I continued to persevere on, no matter how I felt, and eventually I healed. About 6 years after my kids were placed back into my home and my dependency case closed, my oldest daughter turned 11. I started to have panic attacks and found myself lost in guiding her appropriately. I had enough support around me that someone pointed out to me that even 6 years later, I was being triggered. My childhood sexual abuse began when I was 11. That's when I grew up quickly. It's when I stopped being a child mentally. I had no idea what I was supposed to look like to be a healthy and safe 11-year-old, nor did I know how to parent safely an 11-year-old. At this point, my positive social connections had grown. It is filled with other school moms, coworkers, my faith community, parents I met at community cafes, and more. They helped me to overcome this trigger without having to go back to old behaviors or give up on remaining a parent who could help to guide my kids. I have never had to hide my struggles with mental health or substance use from any of my people, and they continue to support me in my recovery. I no longer have to be a chameleon of any type. Along the way, God continued to place new people in my life, and those connections have taught me how to talk about my experiences and how I can use my story to help others. I truly believe in the healing power of peer support and positive social connections because my life and the lives of my children have truly been blessed because of it. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the emotional support and the practical assistance. And we really already touched on the power of emotional support from positive social connections on the last slide. In my journey, another important piece is the practical support my family received as a result of these social connections. I came from an unsafe household, but from the outside looking in, or from the system's perspective, you would never know. I could not always rely on my family to provide support as I began my journey in recovery. I needed support from my friends to help watch my children so I could engage with meetings. Those closest to me believed I was no longer using drugs, and so that meant that I was just better. They believed there was no reason for me to continue with the things the system had assigned for me to do, such as meetings or therapy. We know to be an effective parent, we need to practice self-care. I couldn't even ask someone to watch the kids for 20 minutes so I could go on a run or a walk or to the beach to clear my mind or to have coffee with a friend to decompress from the everyday stressors of life so that I could refocus. I was often criticized when I asked for help or support because my kids had just returned home and I was told I should be grateful, as if needing self-care had anything to do with the gratitude of having my family back together. When I was living paycheck to paycheck and the courts told me I needed to obtain housing or I would lose the rights to my kids within a year, I was fresh out of county jail, I had a felony on my record, and I hadn't worked in years. My 12-step community helped me to get to meetings, court dates, and even supported my family through Christmas and birthdays. When I had to work and I couldn't make my own schedule, they helped me to pick my kids up from school. When the year came, when I experienced those multiple traumas, my positive social connections inside and outside of the rooms of recovery, they brought food for my family, took the kids for a while so I could breathe, stayed on the phone as I repeated myself over and over again, and they were just present and they just listened. The recovery journey that my family has been on for the last decade has truly been made possible by these God-given positive social connections within my life. I am not sure where I would be without both the emotional and practical support that we received through these connections. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to Maria.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your story and the positive impact that social connections have made and continue to make in your life. And thank you for being courageous in your willingness to share your story. So if we engage in positive social connections, what will happen? It will help our families build, sustain, and value the connections. It'll help create a more inclusive environment. We'll let more people become a part of who it is we need to be. Once again, but only those that really are going to be healthy for us. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. What does a healthy versus unhealthy relationship look like? It talks about that social connections help facilitate mutual support. Sarah has talked about all those different things as well as myself in terms of what does that bring to the table for us individually and even collectively. And it helps promote engagement and participation not only within our families, but within our communities. So now that we have a better understanding of the power and importance of these social connections, let's discuss quickly how it is we can continue to maintain these social connections in this whole new world of social distancing. There's many different ways that we can stay connected. We talk about the old school ways of writing letters, and really that really has become almost an art that's gone by the wayside. But it is so powerful when you just sit down and really write a letter and put it in the post office. When people put it in the mail, I mean, people are like blown away when they receive a handwritten letter. There is nothing like it. And really, I would even encourage you to teach your children to do that. We talk about using the phone call. It's simply as making a call. You might call people that you haven't called recently just to kind of reconnect with people. Most people have a phone, whether it's a landline or a cell phone. Most people have a phone. We talk about new ways of communicating, whether it's via texting, whether it's doing social media, whether we're doing video conferencing like we're doing today. There's all these different mechanisms for us really to maintain these social connections. So now is an opportunity for us to explore all the different ways that we can maintain these social connections in this time of social distancing. Janelle, I bet that there's some creative folks on this webinar that are maintaining social connections for themselves and their kids. Would you like for us to ask them how they're doing that right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think we can open up the question box, and if you can go ahead and share, what are some creative ways that you have been able to maintain social connections for yourself and for your children? Someone wrote FaceTime. Lots of FaceTime responses, video calls, Zoom, video chats, the house party app. Someone wrote writing letters, postcards, my kids Zoom with their friends, Marco Polo. Let's see, game night over Zoom. I love that idea. I read that as well on an article. 12-step meetings, Skype meetings. Trying to read some different ones. Virtual play dates, making cards for grandparents. Oh, there's so many coming in. Drive-bys to wave at our friends. I love that, Jen. Funny emails daily during COVID. Lots of talking weekly on the phone. Virtual birthday parties. Zoom bake-off competition. Let's see, what else is there? There's so many coming in. Sending birthday cards, good old-fashioned board games. I love that. My family and I have definitely been doing that. Pokemon battles, puzzle challenges, piano lessons via FaceTime, card games. My senior and I are writing cards to other seniors. Sending some texts. Someone asked a question, what suggestion does the speaker have to foster social connections between teachers and students? Social emotional learning is critical. I know that's one of our topics that we're going to be talking about later. I think I'll go ahead and hand it back. I did read one monthly supper club with 14 friends. Those are some great ideas, everyone. Thanks for sharing all of that. And I'm going to pass it back to Maria.
Thank you, Janelle. So we've talked a lot about positive social connections, which are really what we want to talk about, really our healthy relationships. So let's just spend a couple of minutes before we close. When we talk about a positive social connection, we talk about healthy relationships. What are some of the elements that you think about when you think about a healthy relationship? So I've done lots of trainings, and part of when I do these trainings, I always ask people, so what do you think are the components of a healthy relationship? So these are some of the common ones that we always come up with. So we talk about love. Everybody wants to be loved and wants to feel like that's a part of why we are in this relationship. And there's different kinds of love. We talk about that people want to feel safe, both physically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually. We talk about the idea of trust and support. And it really means that we're supporting one another in our goals in life. We're respecting our own feelings, our friends, our activities, and our opinions of ourselves as well as the other person. We talk about honesty and accountability. That's pretty self-explanatory. We talk about shared responsibility. So what does that mean? Mutually agreeing on the fair distribution of work, making family decisions together. We talk about the whole idea of negotiation and fairness. And I think that in a relationship, most relationships, there's always going to be that negotiation and fairness. We talk about we need to make sure that there's non-threatening behavior that's in this relationship. We talk about economic partnership. And that's really talking about how it is that we come together to make those money decisions, making sure that both partners benefit from whatever that financial arrangement is that they've decided. One of the reasons that's at the top of the list in terms of why people end up breaking up or why it ends up being an unhealthy relationship is really that whole economic thing, because people don't feel like it's a partnership. One person feels like I'm doing all the work, or I'm, bringing all the funds to the table, and that does not work, or one person wants to be in charge of it. We talk about mutual respect. Respect is one of the most important things that you absolutely have to have in a healthy relationship. And then responsible parenting. And it really talks about how is it that we decide to share those parenting responsibilities, and how is it that we become a role model for our children. And really, when we talk about responsible parenting, one of the things that really kind of helps is if you are on the same page with the person that is helping you to co-parent your child, whether that is your spouse, your significant other, or whoever else, the caregiver. But once again, making sure that you're on the same page. So that's the component of a healthy relationship. So now let's look at what we talk about when we think about unhealthy relationships. So when we think about unhealthy relationships, we really talk about the use of power and control. We talk about the use of economic abuse. So when we talk about economic abuse, what does that look like? It's preventing someone from having control of their money, possibly stopping them from getting the job or keeping a job so that you really have control over that, taking that person's money, not letting that person have access to their funds. We talk about the use of isolation. We know that isolation is absolutely so dangerous. And really the whole idea behind isolating someone is taking them from the people that they love, taking them from people that possibly can help them deal with this abusive type behavior. We talk about use of coercion and threats. That's really making or carrying out threats to do something to hurt somebody, threatening to do something to somebody, even if you don't physically do it. So once again, the use of intimidation. How is it that I can intimidate someone to get them to do what I want them to do? Making people afraid, whether that's by something physically that you do, by a look that you do, by just smashing, destroying things. It's really just inappropriate behavior. And then last but certainly not least, we talk about minimizing, denying, and blaming behavior. So it's really, in this case, we just make light of when we engage in inappropriate behavior. We always make it seem like the other person is responsible for the things that are going on, and we shift responsibilities for the things that we do in terms of it's something that they made me do. So these are really all components of what we call unhealthy relationships. So I'm really hoping that this is not a comprehensive list, but it certainly talks to some of the prominent components that can be present in an unhealthy relationship. And I really hope that everybody on the line is really looking at, am I in a healthy relationship? Are there components that I have that are unhealthy? And if so, put together a plan in terms of how it is you're going to address those unhealthy components in your relationships, if in fact they exist. And be sure to do that in a very safe way. So now the next slide, it's an absolutely wonderful infographic. And really this infographic talks about ways to promote resiliency. And remember I talked about last week, we talked about the whole idea behind being resilient is the idea that we can be able to overcome our adversities, to be strong, to be flexible, to come back, to deal with our everyday stresses. So this really talks about how it is that we use social connections to become resilient from an individual perspective, from a family perspective, and even as a part of a community. If you look at it from an individual perspective, there's a box there that says relationships. It says our ability to form relationship with peers, but it's not just peers, it's really with families, friends, and other people in our circle. When we talk about family, it talks about role models. We need to make sure that if we have social connections, we need those people to be positive role models for our children and for ourselves. We need to have supportive relationships. It talks about positive child caregiver relationships. So once again, the role of relationships in terms of our families. And now in terms of our community, when I think about what says access to services, if you know the right people, they will connect you with all those services that you need. Once again, if you have the right social connections, they will help you do the protective factors, the parental resilience. They will help you do the concrete support in times of need, the knowledge of parenting and child development, as well as the social and emotional competencies of children. We go back to school, we talk about positive school climate and supports. There's nothing better than you to do as a parent is to have a good relationship with your teacher. That was always so important for me when my kids went to school. The teachers knew day one who I was. We're working on the same page. Feel free to call me if something is out of order that is not seen right, and I'll feel free to call you if I think something is going on. So really to build that important relationship with your teacher, because that person, individual, has your child normally longer than you have them within the course of a day. And then it talks about mentors, role models. They could be coaches, anybody really that really provides those kinds of relationships in terms of being able to help us be resilient as community members. What is it, once again, that we bring to the table? So those are just some of the ways that our social connections on an individual, family, and community level will help us to become resilient and to remain resilient. So now that we've discussed and shared information on social connections, we really now want to hear from you in terms of how do these social connections can support your family. So Janelle, you want to go to our next question and handle that for us, please?
Sure. So another question to engage our audience. We are wondering from you all on the questions box if you can share, based on a current challenge your family is facing, how is the social connections protective factor involved, or how could or should it be involved? So maybe think about some of those answers that you shared prior about people you go to for support, and maybe think about that connection to your challenge. So again, I'll read it again. Based on a current challenge your family is facing, how is the social connections protective factor we've been talking about today involved, or how could it be involved? We have been doing a lot of FaceTime since we've been home. Social distancing. My husband, who is my main support, keeps me laughing while we want to return to normalcy. Having open communication with teachers has been important for someone. Let's see, there's lots of them coming in now. My husband is stuck overseas, and I get to talk to him daily as the only thing that gets me through. Having open communication, making them sure that they're not alone. I reach out to my Unbreakables group and ask for advice on how to deal with particular disappointments of my graduating senior. Acceptance of no matter what we bring to the table, no judgments. Speaking to my family daily, bonding. As a GAL, this information will help me show my 15-year-old client that she does have positive social connections to help her move forward, onward, and upward. My brother and SIL have been trading off the kids, 14-year-old and 8-year-old. The kids get a break and the parents get a break as well. That's a great suggestion. Frequent calls. My daughter is an ICU nurse. While she's working with COVID-19 patients, her daughter has to stay with us. She and her mother FaceTime every night. Her other aunts come over to play with her to make sure she is not feeling isolated. That's a great idea. My parents and brother are in Japan. I speak to them all the time. A teacher spends her days just driving to her students' home just to say hello, to make sure that they know she misses them. Lots of different responses. Praying together, doing drive-bys, not being able to see people, so doing drive-bys. And there's lots more responses coming in. So we appreciate everyone sharing. My parents are in their 80s. We Zoom every weekend. Great to hear stories of their relationships with their grandparents. The grandchildren are loving the stories. Thanks, everyone. I think I'll go ahead and pass it back to Maria now.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you everyone for sharing those fantastic ideas. I was writing some of them down, okay? They were great. So this is an African proverb, and the proverb says, when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion. So this proverb talks to the power of unity and working together to overcome an enemy or a foe. So all I want you to think about is how powerful each of us, how powerful we are individually, but more importantly, how powerful we are if we come together. And what the proverb really tells us is that there is nothing that we cannot do together. There's no enemy or foe we cannot overcome if we will just come together to do that. And what I'm asking everyone here once again is that how do we use social connections to come together to tie up this foe of isolation, of child abuse, of neglect, and all the things that are happening. So as we begin to wrap up this webinar, we hope that you will reflect on today's experience. We also would like your feedback on how today's experience has impacted you. So we're going to bring up a poll. So Janelle, if you could bring up that poll. So the poll says, do you feel your knowledge of the social connections protective factor has increased as a result of this webinar? If you could just respond either yes or no, we would appreciate it. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to respond. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about how do we bring the protective factors to life in our communities after we get the results of our poll. So it looks like 97% of the individuals said that they did increase their knowledge. Fantastic. And then it says 3% that says no. So hoping that we can do something for the 3%, but we're happy about everyone that came onto this webinar. Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Maria. So we're going to talk about bringing protective factors to life in your community. Community cafes are one way to bring protective factors to communities for meaningful conversation and learning. There's no focus on where you're at in life or who you work for, but instead what experience, strength, and hope you can bring to the table as a parent. As parents, we can learn from others on how they implement the protective factors in their lives, and we can use that information to learn new ways to implement them in our own lives. By partnering together, we can work collaboratively to create a community that suspends judgment and focuses on strengths. We are working with multiple stakeholders and collaborating across systems to bring the protective factors virtually to offer support to families in each of Florida's regions. If you're interested in bringing the protective factors to life in your area, please contact Chris Lawley at Prevent Child Abuse Florida. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, Maria, and Chris for that great information on the protective factors framework and social connections. Thanks also to all of the webinar participants for joining us and sharing your thoughts and perspective. There was some great information shared. We're so excited to be able to review this information and be able to share it with you and others for future reference. As mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, and once available, it, along with the presentation slides, will be posted on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website. Should anyone have any additional comments or questions, please contact the team at Prevent Child Abuse Florida at the email addresses there below. We have it for Mr. Chris Lawley and his colleague, Ms. Nydia Natuda. The next webinar on bringing protective factors to life will be next Thursday, April 23rd at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. We will be focusing on a very important protective factor, concrete support in times of need. Something that we all need or something that we should all be aware of, particularly during the situation we're in right now. Please visit Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website for additional information. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you got a lot of great information, and we hope you have a great evening. Thank you so much.